And I started talking to Bruce a couple of years ago, and when he found out I was a guitar player and then my first bill, and he told me about VintageBluesGuitars.com, which is his business with Tom, and it's I'll be honest with you, it's like guitar porn. Yeah, they take old guitars. Well, I'll let you tell the story, but it's a great website.
Our perception.
So take it away. This is Tom Wentzel. You guys know him.
And I appreciate, I think I've been here 3-4 meetings maybe, and I appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, my virtual partner actually set it all up, and I'm doing it, but in some ways it's easier for me to do it because I can control it. And about an hour, is that what we're looking at?
Sounds good.
So,
unless people start leaving, but
yeah,
longer if they don't.
Believe me, I taught in a public classroom for over 25 years, so I can take that. So yeah, anyway, so this is a totally different thing from that guitar over there to this guitar here. Even though they're both guitars, they sort of serve, sorry about that, they serve the same function. They really exist in different worlds. The vintage guitar market is a lot different than the new guitar market, and for a lot of reasons. And I'm going to sort of talk about, some of the points of interest in this market compared to like a new build. And also for guys, I know some of you probably are involved in vintage guitars already, and for you builders that may have like your next door neighbor's grandfather's guitar comes over and can you put a new bridge on this, that kind of stuff always happens. You mention guitar in a social circle and suddenly you have 3 or 4 requests for, you were talking about that earlier, people just know you're a guitar guy and suddenly they find you. So that kind of stuff happens. Again, being the consummate teacher, I do have handouts. It's kind of dorky, but if anybody wants to follow what I'm talking about, I have these handouts. And in the best interest of education, there's going to be an assessment at the end. So there is. I know you all hated school and hate this already. But I do have, if you want to follow the talking points, I didn't realize 15 people would come here. But if you can just share these around and just sort of double up with somebody. I'm sorry, I didn't think so many people would want them. But when we come to the evaluations, I have maybe like 10 sheets and you can double up with a partner. I brought along, I think, 5.5 guitars. And at the end of these talking points, we can go look at some of these vintage guitars here and apply some of the stuff that I'll be pointing out in the talk. So we'll do that in about 15, 20 minutes. When I taught teachers, I taught grad classes too for University of Pennsylvania for 3 or 4 years too. And when I taught adults, I always liked to have my laptop because everything was on the laptop. And then I had one of those laptop projectors. You could do all the talking points on the screen like that, just hit the button or whatever. And you look like a genius, like you know all this stuff. And now we're back to old school. I had to go with the hand-typed notes. So the first thing I'd like you to do, and this is pretty informal, this is not like a planned presentation where I have to cover all these points in order. If you have a comment, if you have a question, blurt it out, raise your hand, catch my attention somewhere. I'm certainly open to that. It won't distract me. What I'd like you to do first is either think to yourself, just think to yourself for like 30 seconds, what is a vintage guitar? If your neighbor asked you, well, what's a vintage guitar? What makes a vintage guitar? Just think about that for 30 seconds, like a definition or bullet points. And now that you've thought about the traffic on the ride home today, just take about another 30 seconds, just turn to a partner and just mention some of those talking points or some of the ideas that you had thought about in that time period. I'll listen to you. What's a vintage guitar?
I've always kind of fascinated where something a little older, and
that's what I was saying. It has some edge to it. What's popular for me.
I think those people value by virtue of its age rather than just
the same thing. I think it's all going
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Is it an old guitar or is it vintage?
yeah.
kind of like the 59 Les Paul, that wood, that tone. Right.
Generally, I think of it as being older, not necessarily very old, but and has something about it that makes it unique and desirable.
I heard old and unique, and again, I would either type these things, put them on a whiteboard or something. Old, unique, and I wasn't being rude to the group. I was just giving him the opportunity to talk about what he was thinking about. So we heard old, unique. What else did you hear, or what else did you think of?
Something that made it popular in its day.
Okay, popular.
In other words, maybe not necessarily a fad thing, but maybe something musicians found
Yeah.
particularly useful, you
Yeah.
know?
Okay, a strong tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why, you know, as time passed, people were going, hey, I'd like to have one of those. Maybe
I need
I'm thinking like the 59 Les Paul, something like
Exactly.
that.
Perfect example.
You know, the wood of that year and
Yeah, the
and the
sunburst,
design.
dual PAFs, yeah.
Or Dan Electro Choral Sitar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people aren't breaking the doors down for those, but there are people buying them because they're in certain songs from our generation.
Yeah.
What other kind of ideas came out for vintage guitar? What is a vintage guitar? Collectible.
You might also have components that you can't get anymore.
Okay.
I mean, you mentioned the pickups,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah. PAFs are sometimes worth more than the guitar they're on. Yeah.
And, you know, maybe there's some items in an acoustic guitar, some of the
Yeah.
woods, like today.
Brazilian rosewood backs
There
and
you go.
sides.
You can't touch it anymore. It
Yeah.
was very useful, and people
Yeah.
found it
Yeah.
very functional.
If that D28 were Brazilian, it missed it by a year. If that were Brazilian, I wouldn't have brought it because it would be too valuable to actually risk falling off the table. But it's Indian, so you got a good point. What else?
Certain models.
Say it again?
Certain models came out at certain times that were specific.
That's right.
You know, that maybe only ran a couple of years.
Right, so if they only made a certain, like a Trini Lopez model of Gibson, for example, they only made them through a certain number of years, then it limits the supply. So a vintage guitar can
In
be,
combination with age.
yeah, with age.
Well, I have a question for you
Go ahead.
then, related to that. There were certain periods of time when guitars were more popular and that production went up. Does that lower the value and the vintage,
Yeah, it's
whether
a
to
good
classify it?
question. That's one of my talking points, and rarity doesn't mean expensive. I have a 1915 Wayman in parts over there, made in Philly, and if I can get $1,000 for it, I've seen maybe 4 Waymans in my whole vintage career of 30 years. I've owned 3 of those, but they're just very rare guitars, but not a lot of people looking for them.
Well,
Anything we didn't hear? Yes, sir.
I just think of vintage as age now. You know, I brought along to show you a 60s vintage folk singer, Gibson folk singer. I bought it from an old timer this summer who said, I have an old guitar.
Yeah.
My vintage light came on, I said, it's not a J45. He said, I
Yeah.
think so. So now I've got an F25.
Right.
It's a vintage guitar, but it's not a J45.
Right.
It's a mirror.
So it has the age to it, and that particular model was made during a certain time period. Again, you look like a baby boomer. You know, the baby boomers drove all this stuff, like it or not, they did, because it was a huge population bubble. And the folk singer guitar came about because people were getting into folk music back in the late 50s and early 60s. So we touched on a lot of things here. What is a vintage guitar? I mean, unfortunately, at the ends of these kinds of discussions, there's no answer. I don't have an answer. This is, you know, you look it up in the Heritage, this is the vintage guitar. There'll be definitions in there, but it's a sliding scale. It's like, what's pornography? You know, it's a sliding scale. For you, one thing, for you, another thing, and so on. And all the answers are correct for your needs and purposes. Bruce and I, and a lot of the people in the vintage market, look at a vintage guitar as pre-1970. Now you're thinking, well, that's an odd year. Well, isn't that odd? Because like I said, that D28 over there is Indian rosewood. In 1970, Martin made a lot of changes in their production. In 1970, America in general made a lot of changes in their production of everything. You know, I mean, think of a 70s, how many people are jonesing for a 74 Chevy? You know, they're not out there, they rusted away, they were terrible. Wash machines made in America, they went down to tubes. So those kinds of things were happening in 1970. Another thing that happened then is the Harmony guitars. Have you all heard of Harmonies, I'm sure. In fact, a lot of you probably owned them when you were kids. I did. And well, Harmony guitar was, there were like 3 or 4 factories up in Chicago that produced probably millions of guitars between Regal, Harmony, K, Stromberg Voice and Net, and so on. They just pumped them out thousands and thousands every day in these huge factories. And they were basically, you know, your starter guitars and some of your better guitars. Martin and Gibson were always building generally better guitars. But starter guys, when I was 14, I might have bought a Harmony. But what happened is about 1965 or 66, with the popularity of the folk boom and all that, rock and roll boom, the Japanese factories started producing guitars. Now Harmonies in 71, 72 were basically solid wood guitars. They were still pretty well made through a process that was going on for like over 100 years. But the Japanese could bring in plywood guitars that played pretty well, they could price them cheap, and Harmony by '73 was done. That was the last big factory in America, the Harmony guitar factory. Martin struggled on, but that guitar right there, they changed a few things. One of the things was the rarity of the materials. The Indian rosewood was more available. Brazilian was, Brazil wised up that, hey, these people from up north coming down and getting all our logs, all they're doing is paying us to cut them down and drag them, and then they get, they get the salt and everything else. So they started to control some of that. They ran out, they logged them out, so Brazilian became very hard to get for a guitar factory like Martin. So they went to Indian. Another big change they made is warranty. Martin had a lifetime warranty. And if you're a factory, and I sell vintage guitars, I don't like guitars coming back because it's just a big headache. If I'm building guitars, I don't, you guys don't want a guitar coming back, saying the bridge pulled off, the top's lifting up, or whatever. So Martin realized they were giving out these lifetime warranties, which was a huge sales thing for them. But on the other hand, guitars were coming back because of the way people treated them. They were selling many, many more in those days, and so on. So they took that little potato chip maple bridge plate out of there in '69, early '70, and they replaced it with something the size of an ice cream sandwich, a big chunk of Indian rosewood. And you all know the dynamics of a guitar. The top of the guitar is really, the breathing heart and soul of a guitar. It's what vibrates, it what makes the sound pump, and so on. And you take a little lightweight piece of dense maple and replace it with a big chunk of rosewood. I don't know why I can hear it, but I believe I can hear it. And for collectors, for players, anything pre-'70 is better than post-'70, and that's just one example. The workmanship actually declined too, and I mentioned that with like cars and wash machines. No matter what you were buying in America, the workmanship declined. So people were going back to getting the better made guitars in the '50s rather than the '70s. Yes, sir?
Back to the bridge plate, why do you think they thought that the bridge plate was the issue with their guitars?
Dick might be able to say that. I'm going to guess here, but I'm thinking it's pretty accurate. I think it has to do with warranties. When you have that little potato chip bridge plate, you get that pull on the top that's going to make that bubble behind the bridge. And they were probably getting a lot of warranty things where the bridge was pulling up, and when it did pull up, and a lot of times it's because they stuck it in grandma's attic, and the heat and humidity just made it pop. But when it did pull up, that little potato chip of a bridge plate, busted up with it and could pull pieces of the top, and you had a big nightmare. So instead of just gluing the bridge back down, they had a major repair where they had to get inside a guitar and replace a bridge plate. So they figured, and a lot of other companies did the same thing. I mean, inside that J200, that would be ballast in the back of my pickup truck in a snowstorm. It's so bad in there. It's just incredibly bad. And even the neck block on that thing changed from the '60s into the late '50s into the early '60s. The neck block is a gigantic hunk of wood. It's almost like a carved sculpture. So I think that's what they did. They just put a giant piece of wood in here that was bigger, much thicker, and covered a broader area so that when the pull of the strings would pull, the top would stay nice and flat. No more callbacks for that.
I have a good example of that with an early Martin here.
On the bubble, I'll take a look at it. I've seen enough of those.
I'm just wondering if, it seems to me that the issue with the Martin is that it needs a neck set.
They always do.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if they missed the boat as to what was really going on.
Honestly, Martin didn't miss the boat. They build some of the finest guitars out there. They still do. They always have. Every guitar, that guitar that you guys are building now is probably going to need a neck set someday because it's the natural pull of the strings on the body. And it's not really the neck that moves. It's the whole body, the wood, everything just stresses together. It was perfectly flat when you built. The geometry was the way you wanted it when you built it. And then the whole thing just hinges in the middle. It's not really the neck. It's just this right in here where the block is, this everything involved here, the top, the sides, the neck, it all starts to tip in because the strings want the guitar to do this. So you're building your guitar so it stays like this. But after 20 years, 30 years, some guys buy new Martins today, after 5 years, are sending them back for neck sets. It could have been that particular wood, the glue that day, the humidity, whatever, causes those kind of things to happen. But every guitar is going to go through those kind of stresses. In fact, some guitars, they build these adjustable necks on. They can just loosen the bolt and stretch it or straighten it out. So no matter how expensive the guitar, they're always going to need neck sets. When you get into these kind of guitars, the factory-made, mass production guitars, they always need neck sets. They're always pulled up. I've seen one that actually didn't. And that one's close, but to make it a good player, it does need it.
Wait, to talk about the difference between makers and vintage guys, this winter I bought a plywood K-Craft.
Yeah.
You know, speaking about nut adjustment.
It's a K-Craft with the adjustable neck?
Yeah.
And it says K-Craft on the headstock?
Yeah, and the decal, 1937.
Yeah, well, that's not plywood, that's solid birch. It shouldn't be plywood.
Oh, they bent the birch like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
absolutely.
misunderstood. I figured.
The Stella did the same thing, that Oscar Schmidt did. They took thin cut birch and then they just bent it over a steam mold.
I knew they pressed
Yeah,
it.
no, that's some, those are great guitars, actually.
Oh, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, all the blues guys play
But
those.
it's not really, a lot of makers would go,
Yeah.
oh.
Well, that's what they would do, was a cheap guitar that
Yeah.
looked expensive.
And it still sounds great.
Yeah, yeah, they're cool
I haven't
guitars.
tried setting the neck adjustment myself, but I mean,
Yeah,
well,
but it has it.
a screw and a wing nut.
Yep, it has exactly right, it has it. So let's talk about, for a few minutes, the rise of the vintage market. Where's it come from? I mean, back in '38, if you were a musician and you went out and had the means and bought a 38 D18 or a 38 D28, you were buying the state-of-the-art acoustic guitar in the world. So, and those guitars still are pretty much at that level. Because that's all that was there, really, unless you wanted to get a Chicago-made instrument or a Jersey City-made instrument, cheaper production. But if you were a professional musician, you could buy the best guitars made, and those guitars played well, they served you well, they lasted okay, and so on. So that's, there was really no need for a vintage guitar market because the vintage guitars were actually being created in the 20s and 30s and so on. But what started to happen is after World War II, with the rise of bluegrass, and you're going to find this parallel with rock and roll, with blues, with bluegrass, as the music and pop culture and the bubble of the baby boomers all rise in this strange coalescing, this whole vintage market started to get wheels as well. So like, I'll point out a few things. Bluegrass, for example, they've always had like Bluegrass Unlimited, Pickin' magazines. This might bring back memories to some people. Back in the 50s, if you were going to go to a bluegrass concert or read this magazine and you see Lester Flatt playing his, his 1942 D28, that's what you wanted, if you could find one. And they were used guitars back in the 50s and 60s, but there was a lot of trading in that bluegrass market among those D28s that never saw the light of day, and it still happens today. A couple of other things. Groom guitars, I use him as an example. He's been around since the 60s as well, and he's pretty much a mover and shaker in the market today. He helped shape the vintage market the way it is today as well. This little catalog is from 1996, and if you know anything about web production, it's a big deal. Can you imagine producing this every month? It's a page after page with color photos about the guitars that he sold and sells. And it's interesting because here's an F5 signed by Lloyd Loar. What do you think he asked for an F5 signed by Lloyd Loar, excellent condition, in 1995? Anybody want to guess?
150,000.
175,000?
Well, now it's probably.
No, I mean back then. The price is in his book.
25 grand.
25 grand? Any other guesses? It's free. 35,000. Today, the last Lloyd Loar sign that I heard, an excellent condition trade, you're pushing $750,000. 1995. We could have all gotten the train right there for 35,000.
But the only thing that drives that is scarcity, right?
No, because that guitar back there, you can look for the next 5 years and never find one like it. But I can hardly get $1,000 for it. It's scarcity, but it's all these other things I'm talking about. The bluegrass pickers see Bill Monroe on the cover of these magazines, and they say, I want that mandolin. And I'll tell you, if you ever seen a Loar piece, I mean, it's like a brain surgeon made that instrument. They're phenomenally made, perfect instruments, beautiful. And they're very rare, too, just like the Martin D45 from pre-World War II as well.
Well, if he would have signed 10,000 of those, the price would go down.
Right, but they still be valuable.
Right.
But part of the thing is with stuff like this is the baby boom.
Right.
We're now at an age where we can afford this stuff, or some of us can. And we bid stuff up. We make stuff more expensive.
There are more of us in the bubble,
That's right.
and we have means now. We're making, my dad, I don't know if my dad made ever 10,000 a year. His life was a factory worker. I don't think he ever hit 10,000 when he retired. But, I mean, I started teaching at 9,000 a year, but, it went up from there. So we have means that our future generations did. But you're right, if he would have signed 100,000 of these, they wouldn't be as valuable. And it's kind of like the D28 herringbone, D18 thing. You know, there are more of those made, so they're, you know, less valuable. But some of those Martins that are rarer, you know, if the famous guy plays it, it's going to be a big guitar. We were just talking about that Epiphone. What's the guy's name that played that?
David Rollins.
David Rollins. He plays an Epiphone. Is it Sheridan?
No, it's an Olympic.
Olympic?
Epiphone,
Okay, it's a generic
1935 or so.
production-made, middle grade to low grade archtop made like in the 50s or 40s.
35. His
35.
is 35, 34, yeah, somewhere in there.
In the vintage market, people wouldn't pay two hoots to it. But because this famous rock and roll guy, whom I honestly don't know of, I just know of him because he plays a vintage guitar. Because of that, these guitars are selling for $1,800, $2,000 at guitar shows. And the same similar guitars from Epiphone, you know, with a few less doodads on it, are like $800, $1,200 guitars. But that's a perfect example of how the fame of the person that plays the instrument helps add to the cachet and the value. And there are many, many examples of it.
Nostalgia component.
So,
Nostalgia, or I can be like, you know, I can be like Bill Monroe if I only have that instrument. I can be Blind Blake if I only can play that guitar. So the other things that came along in that time period in the late 60s and through the 70s, a lot of people like this National Instrument Exchange started producing guitars. And if you look through some of these, like here's a 27 0045. I don't know what they were asking for, but you know, just those guitars were around and being sold. Some of the names in here you'd recognize in the vintage business today as well. Fred's Magazine's another old magazine from the 70s probably, and if a player was on the cover, here's Arlo playing what looks like some type of a Gibson smaller guitar. Is it Arlo? Yeah. Arlo before he had white hair. And things like that. So Grun, there was also a 20th century guitar. Oh, vintage guitar. This is how it came out originally. It was just like a little floppy newspaper. This is 1992, and then it evolved into this paper in through the late 80s and 90s. And then today I still get it, and it looks like this, a big glossy magazine. This is the ground zero of vintage trading today, basically in terms of information. Vintage Guitar Magazine. It's not a promo for it, but it's just a fact. There's no other magazines out there that have so much. Fretboard Journal, they're much more narrow because in here, even a cheapskate like me can pay $100 and get an ad and a nice little 4-inch ad in there every month, and it's just affordable. There are hundreds of other dealers that put ads in there. If you're a builder, you might want to consider putting an ad in there. If you subscribe, I don't know if it's $20, I get it free because we advertise, but in the back there's a little classifieds, and you can put your building information back in there for free if you subscribe. So it's a nice little way to get your name out there in case you're interested in that. So the boomers, the rock stars, the bluegrass pickers, the crazy guitar players, and so on that everybody wants to emulate, all this kind of stuff was getting this whole vintage market off the ground. But the big thing, and I see this, and you guys I'm sure can see it too, because what happened in the last 15 years was this convergence of the desire of the boomers who had some cash in their pockets, looking at these rock stars from back in the day, and then the emergence of the internet. The internet really has taken the vintage market now and made it this little thing in the National Instrument Exchange or Grun's monthly thing, or you look in the back of Pickin' and some guy selling a 36 D18 Advanced X-Race for $1,800. All that changed now because the internet, everybody's an expert. I used to be able to go to public auctions in Lancaster County. Now Lancaster County is like Reading in the Oley area, up in remote areas, Cookstown. There are a lot of conservative people around the county. They're farmers and religious people. They wouldn't buy a fancy Martin, too expensive. They'd buy a Gibson. And I know as a fact or cultural research, they bought Gibson LOOs, which was a low entry level type guitar, but a good guitar. And I used to be able to go out in the auctions and the public sales and flea markets and buy LOOs almost once a month for under $200. But now with the internet and these smartphones, the last LOO I bid on was about 4 months ago near Hershey at a small sale, dumpy little house. There was nothing in that house that I think brought over $10 at the auction. I'm sitting there jonesing for like 3 hours waiting for this guitar to come out because it's a 33 LOO in black with a white pickguard, but a 14 fret with an elevated fingerboard, a very rare version and a very transitional version of an early Gibson flat top. LOOs are hot right now too. When that guitar came out of the house at about noon, The auctioneer's helpers all got their cell phones out. 4 or 5 people in the audience got their cell phones out, and everybody's bidding. That guitar could sell for $4,500. It went for like $3,600. I didn't buy it. So, you know, and it needed a neck set and a setup. So it needed at least $400 or $500 worth of work to make it a true collectible guitar. But it was a true collectible because of condition. I'll get into that in a few minutes. So this whole concept now of the internet allowed connoisseurship to develop. So this is the big word, connoisseurship. And if you all read the internet, which I'm sure you do, you can read about guitar building, but if you go into like the, I don't know what you call it, it's just like the gossipy kind of bulletin boards, like the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum. I'm not trying to single them out, and I enjoy it, I read it. But the unofficial Martin is umgf.com. There's a forum on there, and the Banjo Hangout, the Mandolin Cafe, it's the same thing for those instruments. Everything and anything discussed about vintage guitars is happening on that forum. And I know John Hull posts on there, and some of the, you know, the best builders and repair guys post on there. Some of the biggest collectors in the world of vintage Martins post on there, and it's just a font of knowledge. But what it's created is this thing of connoisseurship, where it's like, what's a connoisseur? Well, it's like if you are faced with like 25 works of art, oil paintings, or 25 vintage cars, or 25 vintage guitars, you have the knowledge to be able to sift through the chaff and pick the best one of the bunch. It's like my wife when she goes shopping. She always finds the best bunch of whatever she's looking at. She looks at, I mean, she'll sit there and look at grapes for like 10 minutes. I'm like, you know, can't we just move on? So that's what connoisseurship is, basically. And it changed the vintage market phenomenally, because now everyone can connect and everyone has access to the information. But what that means for a vintage guy and somebody that's going to pick up a vintage guitar and want to like restore it or fix it so it's playable for your neighbor or for your grandkids or whatever, there are some things, some caveats to think about. So I want to start talking about that. But what affects the value? Well, there are basically 3 things that Bruce and I look at, and most people that look at these old guitars consider the same things: the demand, the rarity, and then the originality and the condition. Now, we already talked about the demand driven by the stars on the music magazines and blue, even old blues like these guitars made in the teens and 20s and 30s, those Stella guitars. That could be a $20 flea market guitar. It was a factory made, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million of them were made. They're not exactly hard to find, but they're hard to find in decent shape because they weren't treated well. That guitar might have cost $8 brand new in 1915. But the fact that, you know, all the blind guys, Blind Willie, Blind Blake, you know, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Willie Johnson, all these blind musicians back in the 20s that started to get the recording contracts on 78s would either be shown in their studio photo holding a Stella guitar, or talk about the sound of the Stella guitar when the revivalists that are our generation went to hunt these guys down and interview them for magazines in the 60s, when they were still, some of them were still alive. So the aura of the Stella as a blues guitar from the teens and 20s for finger picking, they actually have a huge market now, a huge desire and demand for those guitars. The second thing, rarity, and we already talked about that. I mean, F5s are signed by Lloyd Moore are rare. D45s, what was it, 91 of them made? They're rare guitars. They're also good guitars, good instruments. That Wayman's rare. I mean, like I said, I've seen less than 10 of them in my life, but it's not valuable. I mean, it's valuable in the sense that it's a cool guitar, and it's valuable because it's made in Philadelphia and there aren't running them around, but in the market of vintage guitars, a lot of people don't pay attention to them. And there are a lot of little guitars like that people don't pay attention to. They're great guitars, but it's just that you know, all these other things driving have surpassed guitars like that, and Martins and Gibsons and a few others have taken over. But the biggest driver of the value, affecting the value of a vintage guitar, is going to be the originality and the condition. And you know, I mean, if there's one takeaway, it would be retain the originality. Now, what that means to a builder, that let's say you get your neighbor's, you know, like your neighbor's grandfather's 38 D18 or 0018, it doesn't matter. If they need a new bridge, let's say the bridge is up and cracked off, they need a new bridge. Well, that bridge would have been, it was a 0018, it would have been Brazilian rosewood in either a pyramid, or if it were a D18, it would have been belly bridge and Brazilian rosewood. So the point I'm making is you wouldn't call Martin and say, send me a bridge, you know, for 32 bucks, and then put that bridge on. It's totally wrong. And you wouldn't get a piece of ebony and shape it to that old bridge and put it on, because it's totally wrong. And I don't know if it's just me, but I know collectors, connoisseurs, when I walk into a guitar show and I look at a guitar like that, it would attract my eye. If I saw like if I saw a bridge that were like an 1/8 inch oversize, it'd be like looking at a woman with hairy legs, or you know, something weird. It's just like you don't expect to see that, and it's just like it just attracts your eye right away. So you want to try to retain the originality of the guitar, because that's the biggest factor that you can help your neighbor preserve that family legacy. And again, you hear this a lot. We're just the caretakers of these old instruments. You know, when I die, who knows where they're going to go, but someone else is going to own these because they're going to be around for hundreds of years, I'm sure. So that's the other thing, the integrity of the instrument for future generations to learn and understand and know about. Now here's a couple of guidelines, and then I'll turn you loose on these guitars. You can actually look at them. Most people that restore, and I know John would reinforce this, we try to strive for original or exact replacement parts when possible or practical, and to the specs of the period. Now, because of this unofficialmartinguitar.com forum, or those forums like that, you now have people that will take a look at this Martin here. Let's say it was a 38 Martin, and let's say it's a 38 D28. You know, you can spend $100,000 for one. But if somebody replaced a bridge to the exact specs with the exact same wood, but the saddle angle was slanted like a modern D28, they wouldn't even buy it. Even if you said, well, how about $20,000? Don't want it. You don't understand. I don't want a guitar that doesn't have the original specs. And some people would say it about the bridge. I don't want your guitar for even half price if it doesn't have the original bridge. That's just the nature of that, of the connoisseurship. Now that's the top of the, you know, these markets, all markets are like it. If you look at, you know, like the Barrett auto auctions for, you know, there's always a pyramid. Your top buyers are at the top. There might only be 5 guys in the world that pay $100,000 for that D28, but those 5 guys got money and they spend that money. I know a friend of mine is one of those collectors. He's got a D45. He has it insured for more than $300,000. He's got over $1 million worth of D28 herringbones from before World War II. So those people are out there, and they're always ready to. See, the rich guys are always rich. You know, no matter what the economy's doing, they always have money to spend. Not me. So the other thing is exact replacement parts help maintain the integrity of the instrument, the way it should have looked when it was made. And it has nothing really to do with the sound. I mean, if you're going to throw an oversized bridge and bridge plate on there, yeah, it's going to affect the sound. Can your neighbor's grandkid hear it? Probably not. I can. In fact, some of the greatest sounding guitars I've played and owned had cracks out the wazoo, you know, replaced bridge plates, replaced bridges. It's just something about some guitars, the way they're put together, it's just magic. So retaining originality with the exact specs, and when I'm talking about specs, if you order a bridge from Martin today, they profile them different, the corners are rounded different, the saddle angles are different. That's just one example. You think, well, bridge is bridge. Well, it's really not to the eye of a connoisseur and a dealer that would actually be buying that guitar for top dollar. You know, dealers are happy to buy original condition guitars and pay a lot of money for them because that's where, you know, the market is, and there's a lot of buyers there, and you can make more money on that than selling something like this. Here are some of the value hits. This is what, and imagine yourself, like, again, I'm using the dreadnoughts because they pretty much drive the acoustic market. Let's say, again, a 36 D28 has the advanced X bracing, which a lot of people like, and it's in excellent condition. That's where you have to hold as your standard. And let's say that's a $100,000 guitar, just for the sake of discussion. So now you have to take value hits for things that have happened to that guitar in its 60-some, 70-some years of existence. And one thing I want to point out, if you do have an under-the-bed D28 from 1936, I mean, there's stories out there where, in fact, my friend that's the collector bought one of these. Somebody bought a pre-war Martin to play, and they maybe owned it a week or two, hardly ever played it, died, and the guitar was put under a bed until somebody bought it. That actually happens. And those guitars, a dealer would tend to take 10 or 20% premium and add it on to the value. So that guitar would be a $120,000 guitar. And then you work backwards from there. So the $100,000 our baseline. The number one hit that any vintage guitar is going to take is a refinish. If you have Grandpop's 36 D28, it's now a $50,000 guitar. If Grandpop sent it back to Martin in '55 because it needed a new bridge, it had some cracks, they stripped it down, they sanded it off, And it looked beautiful, it looked like brand new when he got it back, and he was happy because he did it for free, lifetime warranty. Unfortunately, his legacies, paid the price of the $50,000. Now, granted, they do have their, how do you put a price on family legacy? You can't, but for all intents and purposes, for the value and for the market, if you were going to buy that guitar for investment, you don't want to send it back to Martin and have them refinish the top or the side or the back, because a total refin is a guaranteed 50% off. What if they just refin the back, or like a lot of times you see a crack in the side, they'll fix it, they'll level it, and then they'll sand a little bit and overspray, just a touch. That's going to knock a lot of money off the guitar, because again, there are people that's like, they're looking at this guitar right here, let's say it's a $6,000 guitar, and did it ever have overspray? Well, yeah, they fixed the crack and just shot that little spot. I'm not interested. Yeah, but we could give it to you for $3,000, not interested. They don't even want it. So that's how fussy the market can be. Now, there are buyers for, adoptable guitars. I mean, we have some really grungy guitars, and certain people love them. So I'm not trying to say you only have to have a perfect guitar. But for the market and for like the top of the pyramid type examples is what I'm talking about. The next thing I look for after I look at the finish, I look for headstock or heel breaks. Now, a lot of times in old guitars, because they used maple or mahogany, that the grain went a certain way, you often get a crack right about here in the heel. And that can be a killer for, for resale value, because we know as woodworkers that when you glue something back together, that glue joint, if done correctly, is stronger than the wood that surrounds it. That's just a fact of science. But in the people's minds of the buyers, where it's an emotional thing, well, that guitar's got a cracked heel, man. That thing's going to fall off. I'll be playing it. It's going to break. Same with a headstock break. I mean, how many times are you with your buddies playing, having a good time, you put your guitar leaning up against the table, and like 2 minutes later you hear this crack, and there's your guitar, now a headless guitar. Then you glue it back on, it's a perfectly fine guitar, it plays just as well, it's sturdy, but in the marketplace, you might as well just deduct 50%, because any headstock cracks, heel cracks are big killers for finished guitars. Now you have things like replaced bridges. This guitar is a mid-60s J200. It's a beautiful, tiger stripe maple, beautiful spruce top. This was the Cadillac of the Gibson line in acoustic back in the day. All the country guys played them, on television shows and so on. This is probably, for this vintage, it's like about a $6,000 guitar. We can't sell it for $3,200. I'm not going to tell you why, because it's part of your test. So replacing things like bridges, okay, there are some guys that believe that a bridge replacement is the same as fret replacement, and a bridge plate as well underneath. They'll say, well, frets, you play them, they wear. You put your strings in and out, they vibrate, they wear, you replace them, no big deal. But then there are the other connoisseur buyers that if it has a replaced bridge, they don't want it. Replaced bridge plate, don't want it. So you have to be careful with that.
Are these connoisseurs that don't play?
Yeah, exactly.
That was the question I had.
They're out there.
Is playability ever a factor? Do
Yeah,
these connoisseurs pick it up and play?
Yeah, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Yeah, playability and sound. Well, I'll just address that real quick. The playability and the sound of a guitar is really why we all got into this in the first place, I think. Because guitars are an attraction. And I remember watching the Beatles in '62, '63, when I was like 12 or 13 on TV, Ed Sullivan. I had no hair because it was a buzz cut back in those days. My sister had hair and she's doing this. I'm thinking, oh man, that's so awesome. You look just like the Beatles. And I wanted to be that. So that meant the hair, the style, the guitar, the music, all that stuff. So you get into that whole guitar thing. And that's just the way it works. So, but things that can be replaced like tuners and frets are pretty much a non-issue, but when you take a guitar like this little Stella, these frets were put on there like in 15 or 18, whenever that was made. And today, those would be called mandolin frets or banjo frets. They're very, very narrow crown, but they still have a pretty wide tang. I can't buy them new. So, I have to refret with a newer fret wire that I don't like to do, but I'm to the point now where when I get these junkers or I do a refret, I save those old frets to reuse them, because up above the 5th fret, they're usually pretty good. So I'm saving those old frets because they're hard to find these days. But replacement tuners, even if you had the best old 36 herringbone D28, if the retuners are placed, it's not a killer for some people, because you can go on the internet, and I know some dealers that specialize in it, they have a stockpile of hundreds of tuners that they've gathered over the years. and they'll sell you those tuners for $500 or $800 or $1,000 to complete your guitar. So the tuners aren't, if you take tuners off, and a lot of guys do this, because today's tuners are by far better than tuners from 1935, generally speaking. So guys will take the original tuners off their old guitars, and they'll put modern tuners on it, but they'll keep the old tuners in the case or in a safe spot, so that if they want to sell the guitar, you retain the value. That doesn't affect it at all.
Maintaining the same screw holes.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, you don't want to bore out the
drilling it out
side.
for
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's exactly right. You don't want to take your drill or whatever and widen the holes. If people do it, then you can refill those holes and recut them, but it's an altered guitar at that point. And even the screw holes, people are fussy about that. The last thing, I call it the mojo effect. Like this guitar, this old Stella here, you know, this thing looks like it never had a case in its life. I mean, it's just like scratched up everywhere. You know, it's just totally worn plate. It was painted on fingerboard. But it's still, for the Stella line, this was a top of the line guitar. Why? Well, because it has all the inlaid purfling. The bottom of the line Stellas had painted on and decals around here, but this is actually inlaid, and it has the good old, looks like a real dark Brazilian pyramid bridge original. And the other thing is, it's made from oak, and they made this white oak in some of their top line guitars, and it has a maple neck, or I'm sorry, a mahogany neck, and they saved that for some of their top line guitars. So this thing looks as ugly as a mud duck, but actually this is going to be $1,000 guitar when I get it, when I get it in that.
I'm in the middle of trying to buy a Ferlini that's exactly a copy of that guitar.
Yeah. A copy of it?
Well, the red of it's old with a red spruce top.
It's an old guitar?
No, from
Oh, it's a new.
Todd Cameo.
Oh, yeah, I know Todd, yeah. Okay, yeah, he makes reproductions of these.
Right, that's exactly.
But that said, this has the early Stella label in it too. But that said, if you go to the flea market next weekend and you see something that says Stella up here, if it says made in USA, you know, it's a Harmony Stella. Harmony bought Stella, like in, when was that? 36, 37 already? So they didn't put their Harmony name on them right away. But by my era, in the 50s and 60s, all those Harmonies made in USA were made, you know, the Stella made in USA were all Harmony guitars, totally different animal than these. The other thing is, this is the top of the line Stella. I'd say 90%, 95% of the Stellas were, you know, entry-level guitars, solid birch, the cheapest woods, a real punky. I think a lot of them were popular necks, and poplar, not popular. And when you take them apart, you know, it just gets real spongy, and you need a lot of like shims in there to get back in solid again. You get all kind. I mean, invariably, every back brace is loose. You know, the ones way back in there, your arm can hardly even fit back in. So there's a lot of issues with these guitars because they were cheaply made. But they're also sought after, and I call that the mojo factor because it looks cool. That guitar is 100% structurally intact. There's really nothing that needs repair except it needs a neck set and maybe some of the frets dressed up a little bit. So it's got good bones.
It is ladder braced.
It's ladder braced, and that's what gives it that unique, sharp sound. Yeah. Okay. So all these issues that I talked about, you know, with the refin, overspray, replace parts, repair cracks, they all affect value. And just think in terms of the $100,000 guitar with the premium for the under-the-bed guitar, maybe being 15, 20%. A lot of dealers like to add on to those. And then everything else is just rolling back from there. Here's a good story. I was called in by a local guitar shop to look at a 1930 OM18. I mean, for a lot of players, the OM18 is like the holy grail of guitars, the OM version. It was the first 14 fret Martin, therefore basically the first 14 fret guitar. And these, I mean, I've never owned one in the past. I would love to own one, so I went out and looked at it in the guy's shop. And he pulled it out of the case, I'm nervous, and it's like, oh, look at the patina, it's just perfect. I pick it up, I strum it, oh man, it's great as playing, this thing's all set up, ready to go. And I'm worried about the price. These guys, you know, this is like a $25,000 guitar. He says, what are you asking, $5 grand? I'm thinking, what? Now suddenly I started to get a little bit suspicious. Well, what it is after looking at it in the light, the thing was oversprayed, and it was probably oversprayed back, could have been in the 40s, could have been in the 50s, but it was oversprayed a long time ago. And when you know the finishes and you can really look at it, the evidence is there. It was an overspray guitar. We ended up buying it. We actually doubled our money on it. and it was a great guitar. I mean, it's one of the best playing guitars I ever played, even though it was oversprayed. So there's an example of that 50% rule. You know, it was or even more than 50% because we only sold like already $10,000. But it was a good guitar to buy because of the condition that it was in. And we knew that we weren't going to be able to get the big money for it, but we knew because of the way it played, it had the magic sound, that it was worth the effort. And then here's the saddest part, before you look at the guitars. 25 years ago, 15 years ago, when guys looked at guitars, you know, they didn't look at oversprays, cracks, replace things, you know, this and that and the other thing. They played the guitar, and if it spoke to them, you know that old phrase, if that guitar spoke to them, they were going to buy it in spite of the crack, in spite of the overspray, whatever, because the guitar played and it sounded like what they thought they should play. Now it's totally opposite. The connoisseurs that, I mean, some of them play, some of them are actually famous musicians, but some of them are guys like me and you that just happen to have the you know, the disposable income to spend hundreds of thousands on guitars. You know, they're driving the market, and that's just the way it goes. If somebody puts out a $100,000 D28, everyone that's selling a D28 from that era reevaluates what they're going to ask for these guitars, whether they put the price up higher or lower. That's just the way markets work. All right, comments, questions on the talking at you part? Yes, sir.
I've seen this issue in a lot of the forums, and I've run into it myself where a guy will bring me a 70s Martin.
Yeah.
You know, they're worth $2,500, $3,000. It needs a neck set, it needs a refret, and the bridge is in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So, you know, the guy notices, you know, part of the problem is the action's high.
Yeah.
But after that's all said and done, it still doesn't play in tune because the bridge is in fact in the wrong place. And I, of course, suggest that this is an option, that you can buy an oversized saddleback bridge and correct that issue. He wants to play it, he wants to record with it. He's not too concerned with how that affects the value.
Right.
But there are people on the forums who would just as soon string me up
Exactly.
for having done that
It's a lynch
repair,
mob out
for
there.
making the guitar
Playable.
playable and usable for what it was designed
How
to do.
dare you?
You know.
Yeah.
Now this is not a pre-war Martin,
Right.
where I would suggest to the guy, you know, maybe you'd be better off selling it and buying 10 guitars, you know, that actually play in tune.
Well, here's my opinion on that. Even if that guy brought in the 38 D28, it's his right to do whatever he wants to do with that guitar.
It's my job to let him know
Yeah, well, it's your job
that
to
the
let him know.
guitar
Yeah.
is worth a lot of money,
Right, right,
and you're going to devalue it.
right,
And that's why I have the blue books there.
right.
So
exactly.
if there's any question, I can show them, look, $38,000, $50,000.
Yep. All you can do is give them options.
Yeah.
And if they choose option 3 that you would not do personally, and they want it, if you're a professional person, you do it. Now, I know repair guys that won't do that kind of stuff. There are some guys that turn the job away. But you know, a 72, what was it, a 70?
I see them all the time.
Was
you
it
know.
70s?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to kill that guitar. I mean, let's face it, there's so many of those made, and the golden era is over. It's not going to happen again. I mean, just let everybody know that right now. The golden era, there never will be 36 D18s made again, period. That's just the way it works. That's how markets work. Just like they won't be making 57 Chevys anymore, or these new Camaros that they come out with, and the new Mustangs. It's not the same. If you've ever driven a high-performance Ford Mustang in 1965, you'll know what I'm talking about.
But don't you think that with all the technology and all the fixturing and all of the, I'm going to make this guitar the same as that one,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
guitars are actually being built as well or better today?
I agree.
It's just that there's gazillions of them out there, so they'll never really be worth what the...
Right, that's right.
what the-
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I'm not standing here saying that a vintage guitar is the way to go for the ultimate guitar. It's not. I mean, there's some fabulous new-made guitars that I played. Anybody here with a Franklin, the guy that built Franklin guitars back in the 60s and 70s? That was my ultimate guitar because a certain guitar player was playing one, and I actually wanted to buy one up at Mandolin Brothers up in Staten Island years ago. And it was a phenomenal guitar. And the reason I didn't buy it is because he wouldn't give me enough trade on my Martin that I wanted to trade towards that guitar. He wouldn't do it, so I walked away. But it was a phenomenal guitar. There's nothing wrong with it. I pick up like Cambio's guitars and play them as 12 strings. I have 2 Stella Jumbos. We just had one on the website for $8,000, a Stella 12-string jumbo, like Lead Belly's guitar.
I have one of Kennard's.
Yeah.
copies.
Well, Cambio makes copies that, you know, for what, $2,000 or something? It's certainly 90% there. It's not exactly the same, but it's very
I got
close.
Del Arte finally for $1,700.
Yeah, the Del Arte's another. They're a tweener. They happen before these younger guys. There's also Mike Halver down in Maryland that makes
I've
the
never seen one of these
reproductions.
places.
Very fine guitar, and I'm not putting it out there that vintage is the only way to live, because you guys make new guitars, and I would be really excited to play some of the new ones that I see here, because they look all good.
You're talking about the difference in the buyers, that there are those who are like the museum curators. They want it original or as original as possible. It doesn't matter if it works, if it plays. There are the players who want the original,
Yeah.
and then there are the players who are using it strictly as a tool. They don't care if it's original, they don't care if it's oversprayed. Does it do the job I want it to do as best? And they're the ones where you're likely to find possibly the most defamation from originality.
Yes, absolutely. And you broke that down really well into the 3 areas of who are potential buyers. I mean, there is a market for messed up guitars, because we sell them all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I mess them up. You know, they come to me messed up a little bit. But yeah, they're issues guitars, and you have to take a price hit, but there is a market for them. But oftentimes, the guy that brings you Grandpa's D28 from 36 and demands a bridge that intonates, you know, it's...
If that guy records and becomes a star, what's that do to that guitar's value then, you know?
Well, it's
It might have
important
been-
to educate
Yeah,
people, because,
absolutely.
you know, just because they're on the internet doesn't mean they are educated. They think they are,
Right.
and you run into it all the time, but, you know, you gotta be responsible with what you're doing.
Education, awareness, I think even this, if I turned on a couple of light bulbs, you know, just by talking about this stuff and putting it out there. I mean, again, you make your decisions, and I respect it. I mean, I know people online all the time, and, you know, private people too, that change things on guitars around all the time, and it's just the way it is. But my nature is, I sort of like things original, and like, we bought at an auction actually, a 0018 from 26, great little finger picking guitar. Almost perfect condition, except somebody took the bridge, and instead of sanding the bridge low to lower the action over the years, they notched out the bridge, and it was funny, because it looked like a bridge with teeth. And I looked at that bridge, and other guys were looking at it, were gonna buy it and say, man, that kills that guitar. You gotta replace that bridge. Well, I took that bridge and I made ebony dust and crazy glue mixtures. And I filled in each notch. Actually, I wedged it in with ebony first, and then I filled in with a dust of ebony and crazy glue. And then I had this micro mesh sandpaper, that padded sandpaper you can get at StuMac. It's phenomenal stuff. I made that bridge. Even some of the experts at the guitar show looked at it and never even noticed it was a repaired bridge. And it holds perfectly fine. So there's a case where everybody was saying, gotta rip the bridge. But I preserved the originality of the guitar and the integrity by keeping that bridge, just by putting a little bit more work in it and restore the bridge it was on. And that's perfectly valid, is what you gotta do.
You're talking about the Stellas being inexpensive instruments, but desirable because of their history.
Yes.
And as far as guitars that are heavily chopped up, have you ever seen the old Harmony that J.J. Cale started out with?
No.
Has 5 pickups in it, held in with body putty, and there's no back.
I've seen guitars like that.
It started as a fun project, and it's grown since then. I saved an old Harmony, and I'm in the process of reproducing J.J. Cale's backless cutaway. Mine, I'm not going to be able to achieve the same level of haste and carelessness that he did, because I don't have the recording deadlines.
There was actually a bluesman that played, I think it was an old Harmony 12-string too. I think it was a Harmony. But he's the guy that did the San Francisco Bay.
Jesse Fuller.
Yeah, Jesse Fuller, thank you. He had that bastardized guitar with like 9 strings. He had, you know, added these tuning keys here and there and pickups all over the place. It looked like a Frankenstein. But again, that's a unique thing that people do. And two things out of that. Number one, these are guys that are creative guys, and they do that thing to chase the sound in their head.
Yeah.
And number two, you picking up on that idea, I think is a great idea. I mean, I have a basement full of old guitars that if you ever want to play around, I have a lot of them down there that would be candidates for that.
There's a website that talks about what they refer to as kamikaze luthiery.
I've seen that on the kitchen table. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
and J.J. Cale's guitar is well documented on that site.
Yeah, I've seen that. And it's really funny. I mean, I've only learned this repair. I mean, I've always diddled with my hands over the years. I've been a hands-on kind of guy. And fixing things, I always liked doing it. And I always could set up guitars and do little things. But it's only in the last 5 or 8 years that I really started taking them apart and learned how to put them together. But luckily, again, with the internet and things like this and luthiers like John Hall, they're free with their knowledge, you're able to ramp up your knowledge really fast. So, I enjoy doing all that stuff too. And we've had our share of Frankensteins. When you're faced with these level guitars, I get really nervous. It's like if I picked up a guitar and said, I'm going to sing this song, I'd be so nervous I couldn't play the song. It's like a performance thing. If I'm at my house playing to my dog, it's like, I feel like I'm on stage, and it's just, I can play everything in my repertoire to perfection that I played for the last 30 years. So it's that kind of performance anxiety. We bought a 50s K, a Jumbo K. Pretty cool guitar, about $1,000 guitar, but it was so messed up. We bought it online from a photo. We thought it was something, and it wasn't. It wasn't X-brace, it was ladder brace. So we were just going to save the parts. It had old tuners on it that were worth maybe $150. It had a tailpiece that was actually added, but it was actually a good old German tailpiece that was worth $50. The pick guard was worth something. Just the body itself without anything was probably worth something. So we figured, okay, we paid $100 for it. We can probably get it out in parts. Well, I looked at that thing one night, and this is talking about when do you work on guitars. One night, I'm down in my shop looking at this guitar, and I thought, you know what, that neck's loose. And honest to God, within 45 minutes, I wiggled the neck off. I had to peel the tongue first, but I wiggled the neck off like in 20 minutes, and I got my chisel out, and I never did this, but the guy, if he comes in here, Dave Strunk, that does those D28 restorations of D45s, he showed me a technique on how to take your neck and just use a chisel and shave the sides. And it's like, whoa, where do you get control? I took my chisel, started shaving, fitting, shaving. Within another 20 minutes, I had the neck angle. I got my glue pot. I use old high glue. I use hot high glue. Got my glue pot going, and within an hour, I had the neck off, reset, and re-glued. And I thought, man, that was so easy. So then I said, well, I might as well do the frets. So I dressed the frets, made a new saddle, took off the tailpiece, took off the bridge another night, and all this stuff was with no regard to the guitar. And we actually just sold it for $175. So it's like $600 worth of work, and we made $75. But you know what? I gained out of it, and it was like, it's like performing maybe, to a small group and then to a bigger group. And it's like when you're faced with quality guitars, you get nervous because every little scratch, every little ding, where you set the neck at a wrong angle or whatever, you're screwed. But you get a guitar like that you can drop it, bang it, whatever, it's no big deal. You just feel loose and free, and you can work fast without fear.
Well, how did you get your experience in buying all of these old beat up?
I used to peruse the flea markets, mostly flea markets. You can pick them up. Once we got our website going, people mail us pictures of guitars that are junkers, and we make lowball offers, they sell them. I bought a few on eBay. I bought that on eBay years ago just because I wanted a Stella and just put it in the pile. Yeah, mostly like that, like guitar shops. If you go into a guitar shop and say, well, do you have any junkers that you've never sold over the years? They pull out old Regals and stuff. $20, $50, $80, you can't lose. But the beauty of those guitars, anything made before basically World War II, or harmonies made up till '73, all this geometry, all this dovetail stuff, mortise and tendon, everything is just like in the best Gibsons and Martins in terms of learning your skills. And if you mess up, talking about messing up. Oh, is that time's up?
I don't know, maybe.
Oh, at least the hook didn't. I'll tell you what, since we're probably getting close to the first 30 minutes here, I'll tell you what, I have 5 guitars. I'll just point these 2 up here. I have a Martin and a Gibson. Back there's another Martin 0018. Over here's the Stella. And right behind Eric, is it? Russ, I'm sorry. Right behind Russ is a taken apart Wayman, and notice the dovetail joint on that Wayman, by the way. So I have a little handout with those talking points about how to assess these. If you want to team up with a buddy or just walk around and look at them, make some notes on what you see. If you were looking at this guitar, let's say at a flea market, an auction, your neighbor brings it over to evaluate what it needs to make it a playable guitar again. Let's check it out, and then we'll get together in 15 minutes and we'll just break down what we saw. Does that make sense? Do we have time for that? Yeah.
Instrument technician up at the
Oh, really?
woodwind technician. I told the guys in the string department to his society.
I knew this as his family. I was friends with some of the grandsons that are like my age. Still in contact with some of them.
I'm actually the manager now.
Oh, really?
Band department.
Does the family still own that business? Or
No,
side braces? Yeah. So that's got to be pretty old. I don't know when they started using wood. 40s maybe. By the way, my apologies, I forgot to turn them up. About $1,000.
Yeah,
So we're looking at. Left to do
I think
the-
they were using the, they might have been using ebony and stuff. I don't know then. It's a lot of particulars I don't know.
They put this on, yeah.
I didn't see any cracks.
Which came after the LG2, like
Do
B25.
you hear any? Yeah, if you, any loose braces?
Back this way.
That's the
The
front.
neck set looks good though, I just can't figure why they need that big saddle unless there's no relief in the neck. Oh, the island looks like a hump's right here at the bottom.
When you mark the line across there. Probably when they did the neck job.
Well, this is made for steel.
I was sitting playing at outdoor farmer's market. It's like, oh, yeah,
Evaluate this, I think this is the arm for nothing. By the time you're done with it, I mean, it does have Brazilian sides and back,
Yeah, well, here's the
but the
thing.
top is really black.
Yeah, this is a double of 21 New York. One of these in excellent condition. This strap. But there's a desire one for it. I'm not saying these are sentimental.
No, I think
But they're starting.
Yeah, that's why.
the top, the ridge is really
Yeah,
hard.
this has got some issues. I mean, this is gonna have some. To give us down
Back and sides
Yeah,
They just look too clean compared to the top. So you see a shadow of another bridge, you see some chip out here, so the original bridge is popping.
Looks like it's pulling together. I took suspension off this morning when I opened it up.
Now the question is.
And it's been oversprayed too in certain areas.
And you can see the age right here, you can see the. But I tell you, you can't beat Brazilian. These are popular guitars, they're nice finger pickings. It's a nice little guitar. Plus it looks like it has a little tunes on it. Yeah, you can see the spray all up through there. But, you know.
Well, for repairs.
If I were evaluating this, and if I wanted to buy, like, people bring in guitars from the guitar shop to sell, they get in $1 less for a little guitar, I probably wouldn't pay more than $1,500.
Well, if you were to repair this, then the bridge has to go.
Well, you could use this bridge.
But do you think that there's like loose braces underneath there that's creating this?
Like what happened, it was probably got the little tiny bridge plate. I actually have my tools, so I want to see if I want. But we should finish up here. Let me just out the sides.
Has that been refinished?
It's been refinished or oversprayed.
Nope. It's got
Oh, looks like some funny hazing going on.
Yeah, well, sometimes you get that, and like case hazing is just little things. I mean, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of people, there's nothing wrong with the finish on that.
Looks like there's a crack in the fingerboard about that long that was repaired.
I didn't see that one.
I could be wrong. with
It could
color.
be, yeah, it could be, or it could be grain.
Is it bridge original?
Bridge is original.
You know, right?
Yeah, those guitars from that period often had those big fat belly bridges on with that really big, bold Brazilian rosewood. The only issue to get that one ready for a market, and a collector, probably close to a collector's grade, the only issue with that guitar is it needs a neck reset. The action is playable, but the action's a little bit high. But we bought it as original finish. My partner and I looked it over when we bought it, and we've had a couple of our friends look at it at the guitar show. In fact, a lot of dealers wanted to buy it from us. I took it down there without doing the neck set, but I wanted to do it myself.
Is that saddle originally that low, or is that lower because of the net
That's the evidence
reset?
of the neck set, yeah. The first thing you do when you pick up these old guitars, like I just looked at this old Gibson here, and you can look at that. The old Gibson here had a huge saddle, like almost like over a 1/4 inch. And you say, why such a huge saddle? It never should have that. And then you look at that and you see hardly any saddle, and you say, why such a little saddle? Well, then you know there's a neck angle issue. It's either overset or underset. So you can see it's going to require work. Now that's still a playable guitar, and if you're happy in the cowboy chords, you can play away and probably never need a neck set for that. If you're a finger picker that likes to go up and down the neck, you probably have to reset the neck to make it more playable. But it's a great original example of a nice 60s era vintage Martin guitar.
After the neck reset, what do you think the value will be?
Hopefully more than we paid for it. I'm just trying to think. Off the top of my head, yeah, a couple of grand, give or take, 23, 25, in that range. I think so. Okay, the next one on the list then, how about this D28S? By the way, does anybody know, it's like a trivia question, I can give the official collectible vintage blues guitars polishing cloth, if anybody guesses the question. What is this D28S from Martin in the 60s noted for? It's a 12 fret, it's a long body, but the fact that it was even made, why did Martin make this and not stick with just keep making their 14 frets? I think these came out like in 65, 66.
Well, wasn't there a resurgence of the, what was that player? Who only played it was a D45, was it the 12 fret version, what was his name? Kit Rogers?
Roy Rogers?
Nah,
You're close.
Jimmy Rogers?
Jimmy Rogers played actually a layman, then he played Martins, yeah.
But
he played a triple
that's a
45.
Gene Autry style originally.
maybe that's Gene Audrey. That's
Yeah,
what-
Gene Autry, yeah.
But I don't know why they continued in the 50s.
Gibson.
Well, that might have affected it. I mean, you were sort of hitting on it at one point in your answer, sort of maybe in the ballpark, but there's a specific reason why this guitar exists. Here's the trivia knowledge. This was the first guitar that Martin made that was a copy of an older guitar they made. In other words, the first Dreadnoughts in 1930, what they made for Ditson in 28, 29, they made this with no Martin name on it. It looked like this. It was a jumbo, long body, slope shoulder, slot head, 12 frets. In the mid-60s, Martin said, you know what? We should make like a retro guitar of our great guitars from back in the day. This and the one the gentleman showed me of the 00 NY. The NY in there, here's another trivia question. You all know what New York stands for, right? I mean, NY stands for New York. Why'd they call it the 00 NY?
Because of the shop in New York.
Oh, there's a winner right there, yes.
Was it who?
The shop in New York.
Martin's original shop was in New
Oh,
York
okay.
City, so they made that 0018 and they made a single 018, 0028 NY, New York. Again, right around the same time they made this D28S.
And some of those come with Brazilian yet.
If this is a 71, if this
Yeah.
were a 69, it'd be a
Right.
$6,000 guitar.
Yeah.
Because it's, this
Okay,
era
so
is
that's
a
the
3,000.
cutoff was 1970.
Six,
for the
late
Brazilian.
70, yeah. What kind of things did you see with this one? What did somebody see in terms of condition, originality?
The heel cap might have been replaced, or at least the finish is off of it. It's more white than
Yeah.
yellow.
I'd say the machines are new too.
Scrap block.
Tuning machines, yes, bingo. The tuning machines are not original. They're replaced. It's not a major hit. They work better than the originals, and you can find the originals for $100.
String wraps are up over the bridge.
Yes, string wraps. You see these little red thing? I left them on there. See these little red string wraps? Do you want to talk about what that's indicative of?
Bridge plate, worn.
From hundreds of string changes, the bridge plate inside is so worn away, the ball's coming up in, and eventually it's gonna pop through there and pull the bridge out, ruin the bridge plate. That's another issue that needs to be addressed. What else?
Isn't it a trick to just put your old balls over the end of the
That's a trick.
strings that don't work?
Right. That's the old picker's trick. There were a lot of tricks like that back in the day, yeah.
String it through the old ball and then.
Yep, it's through the old ball or a little washer or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
Not the,
Doesn't
it's a
solve the
temporary.
problem, though.
No, it doesn't solve the
Right.
problem.
Right.
A couple other issues with this one. You all saw the back cracks? Hope you did. I must be a bad teacher. This has like a couple of back cracks here, very, very subtle. I knew the back cracks were there when I bought it, and we bought it at a price knowing this was changed, this was changed. Overall condition, it's not bad, it's not great, but the back cracks are there. Then we had this down at the Philly show maybe 2 or 3 shows ago, last year, and one of the top dealers, he's actually from Canada, Mark Stutman, he loves old Martins, and he likes this vintage Martin. He looked at this guitar, and he was all ready to buy it, and he looks at it and he said, oh, it was oversprayed on the back here. I said, what? And lo and behold, if you hold it in the right light, and I know it's there and I can hardly see it, but when the guy repaired the top cracks, he shot this area right in here with lacquer. And you can just see, it looks like a tide line. When the tide goes out and leaves all the debris, it looks like a tide line. And that's the reason this dealer didn't buy it, because he doesn't want a guitar on his website, and he's an international top dealer. He didn't want a guitar with overspray on his website at this price.
Are there cracks on the side too, in the bottom side?
Where are you looking?
Oh, I could see it from standing over there. No, I turned it again. Right around, right there. I can feel it.
Yeah, there is like a little, you're right, there's a crack right there. In fact, it's an open crack. You can feel it. Yeah. And then the other big issue with this guitar is it needs a neck set. It's just about, this could be a guitar you could play forever and never reset the neck, but right, you know, in the dance or the game that people play, they'll inquire about it. And I always tell the action, and on Martins, people look for 6/64 and 5/64 for like an average, from the 12th fret, from the top of the fret, bottom of the string. This is at about maybe 8/64 on the bass. And as soon as people see that or hear that, they're just not interested, because what's a neck set? $400 anymore. So anyway, a couple of issues with this guitar. They're very subtle. If you saw this at a flea market, looked it up online in your smartphone, thought, oh boy, that's a $4,000 guitar, and you buy it for $3,200, think you're going to make money. Yeah, there's a lot of issues with it that are subtle. So that was a good one to include. What's next on the list? J200. Oh yeah, here's another one. J200. What do you see with this one?
Replacement bridge.
Yeah, right away you can see this got a whopping bridge on it. This is probably a $6,000 guitar for the era and for what it is. Very popular guitars. I never really liked them, but Blind Gary Davis played them, and a lot of country guys played them. Emmylou Harris plays them. A lot of famous people play them, so they're really and they're very well made guitars and glitzy, all the little details. But this bridge, again, it's one of those ice cream sandwich type bridges, big and fat, and it's the wrong way. It's just ugly.
Were the originals that thick, that fat?
Almost. Yeah.
But they were hollowed out more.
Yes, they had more aesthetics involved and hollowed out, better construction. There's one other thing that maybe somebody noticed on this.
My original thought was that maybe the neck was overset, and that's why that bridge is like it is.
Exactly. Did you look at the heel
Yeah.
to see what they did?
They smeared toothpaste in there?
No, they actually put a, that's a good try. I've done that. It wasn't toothpaste though. It was
Okay.
hot high glue with dust.
Okay, some kind of filler, yeah.
They put
Right.
a bigger heel cap on to cover the binding.
Exactly. Somebody took this neck, they put a wedge in here, and then they put a wedge in the heel cap. So what that means, because of the thick bridge and these little slices here, for some reason, it wasn't, I don't know who did it. It doesn't look like the neck was off, but for some reason this thing had an overset neck. In other words, it was too far back, and you'd play up, and it would buzz, and you couldn't get the relief adjusted out of it. So they had to take the actual neck and push it this way, and put these shims in here to dress it up, and then put this big fat bridge on it. Or maybe somebody put the big fat bridge on it, then they had to do it. I don't know. All I know is that we can't sell this for $3,200, and it's a real glitzy guitar. Now, we don't own it. It's on consignment. But,
Aren't there a lot of real changes in the different eras of those things in the
Absolutely.
racing? Because
yep,
Ernie Hawkins has been looking for his.
yeah, he's
perfect
another
deck.
big J200 player.
Yeah,
Yep.
he's gone through so many in the last 5 years.
This is the era where Gibson was going through all kinds of things, just like Martin, where they were getting bigger, fatter bridge plates. There was actually this big rod in here. It wasn't in the guitar when we got it, but this era should have had this huge rod that went from here to sort of stabilize the top from pulling. And most players go in there and yank them out because it's a tone killer. But this would have had that as well. Otherwise, a very cool guitar. I mean, you can go out in the bar and
Is that similar
play.
to that Bridge Doctor thing?
It was,
familiar
I
with
think
the
the
Gibson.
concept, the Bridge Doctor went all the way, but this was just sort of hanging down and then came out. I never actually saw it in here.
I don't think
I've just
I've
seen
ever
pictures. Yeah, I've just seen pictures of them. I never, but this one has the evidence of it.
Is that a crack in front of the bridge there?
Yeah, there are little cracks in front of the bridge here. Again, these devalue the guitar, but because it's such a beat up over everywhere, this is a player's grade guitar. These little cracks don't kill it. This is what kills the guitar. I mean, people could actually live with this I mean, it's a very playable guitar. But this big old bridge, I mean, we've had Japanese buyers look at it and they love these guitars in Japan, and they just wouldn't buy it. So,
Would it be worth it to make a new bridge that is more,
Right.
Would that be the ideal thing to do?
Right, the ideal thing to do would be to remake a bridge. The problem is, what would somebody like John Hall charge? $600 for that? You know, it's a real. I don't have the skill. It's like making a miniature sculpture. I don't have that skill, so I would have to farm it out, and then by that time, I don't own the guitar. The guy that owns it. The other option is to keep lowering the price until it
Well,
sells.
find a vintage bridge for it.
You can do
more
that
than
too,
having somebody carve it.
if you're lucky enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually they break.
Yeah.
All right, the third one is this little Stella over here. I already told you about this one, so since time's running out here, I mentioned really the only issue with this guitar is it needs a neck set. I mean, I strung it up real fast last night by putting this little thing in here and a string on it, and I just pulled a nut out of my drawer. But this guitar will play, even without the neck set, is very close. But to make it a really good player and get the most money out of it, I'm going to pull the neck and I'm going to dress the frets and pretty much leave it the way it is. It's a Mojo guitar, and I know I'm going to have buyers for this because we sold a lot of guitars like this that are structurally sound, no issues, cracks, replacements, and so on, but they have a lot of playwear.
It's the prettiest thing you have here.
Yeah, right. We love vintage, don't we? Right? So, if you might have seen this Columbia Music Shop in the back. Stella made guitars for, they were jobbers in a lot of sense because First Hawaiian Conservatory was a marketer, a jobber of guitars back in the day in the 20s and 30s with the advent of the Hawaiian music craze. And Stella, Oscar Schmidt factory in Jersey City would pump out thousands of these First Hawaiian Conservatory guitars with their labels on them and stuff right out of the factory. And then other companies would buy like a dozen of these at a certain set price, and then they put their own labels on them like that, or labels inside, or their own labels inside. This happens to have the Stella label. This is the first incarnation of the Stella label. It's the earliest one, so we know it was made like before 20 or so. And then lastly, what are we looking at, the Wayman? You want to bring the Wayman up? Is that the one we got here? I also brought that, not necessarily as an evaluation thing, but just for you guys as builders to see another way to do a neck joint. You probably noticed this kind of joint is not the classic dovetail. This is a true mortise and tenon where there's no tapering to the sides of it. So all you do is you put it right in, and you see how the sides of the guitar come right up to the side of the neck, rather than the cheeks of the neck going over the side of the guitar.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting there. I didn't know that when I took it apart, but luckily for me, no steam. It was another wiggle job. In fact, the last 3 guitars I took apart, I pulled the tongue, and I can sort of tell now when I look at a guitar and the neck integrity, I sort of look at it, wiggle a little bit, and I can just get my heat and take this off, the tongue off, and then just start wiggling back and forth gently by holding way up here to get some angle, and then eventually they get loose. I do have a neck jig, and I'll sometimes put it in the neck jig, put very slight pressure on it, and then wiggle, and you see that top come out, or the fingerboard extension pop up about a 16th or a 32nd, and I know I'm home. Then there's no steam. So anyway, this one is a different joint. Bennery guitars made in the late 19th century have the same type of joint as well. I've taken a few of those apart
I
too.
was surprised how many back braces are in there.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And they're flat. Yeah, very interesting. These were made in Philly, and they also jobbed out guitars with the Wayman name, but this one was actually one of the ones made in Philly. Not real fancy. They did make X-brace guitars. This is ladder braced, but it does have a lot of the fancy purfling. It's a nice mahogany neck. It's pretty decent construction, and you know, probably about $1,000 guitar that's placed well.
Faces, got cracks below the bridge.
Yep, you got a typical seam separations and cracks. And you guys might not know this, but you can sort of sense it. You see how fat the bridge is?
Didn't look
The bridge it's not an original bridge. They put an oversized bridge on it, and it's also way too low, which tells you that it's going to need the neck set anyway. Otherwise, you know, this original shellac finish on this isn't a spray. This is probably hand applied, or maybe a sprayed shellac, but it's a different finish than what you find on Martins.
Is that a precursor to the Taylor NT neck?
Is that how they work?
Pretty much.
Never had one of those apart.
You talk about pulling the two necks that were basically wiggle jobs. We recently had one come in that was the complete antithesis of this. It was an absolute nightmare. It was a low Prinzi guitar.
It's a modern.
And it was built like some of the Spanish classicals where the neck heel, the neck block were all one. It was slotted on the sides, so the sides actually fit in. So to change the neck angle, you basically had to warm the whole end of the guitar up to the point where the glue softened, bend the whole guitar, and then let everything cool and harden.
Oh, so you didn't actually take the neck
You
out?
could not,
Yep.
yeah, to take the neck off, you would have had to take apart the upper bout,
right.
so that the neck block and the neck,
Yep.
which is all one piece, would come out together.
What he's explaining there, this is guitar repair trivia. They call that a California neck set, or they call it slip in the block. I don't know if you ever heard those terms, but I do this on, like I have this old Bennery guitar that has one of those rods through it, but it's the precursor that they were doing in 1895. They had a wooden rod going from the heel block to the end block for that, you know, so it wouldn't collapse. So because of that, you can't get your hand in there to do any kind of work. So you can't really, and it has this kind of joint, it's just a mess. So what you do is you take your hot palette knife and you just open up the back seam right along here, you leave the neck on, and then you put it on a jig on your workbench, and then you tighten the jig until the body of the guitar actually bends to the next height you want, and then you have a little bit of the back sticking out because you bent everything down, and then you hit your glue in there, clamp it, let it dry, and then you shave off that, polish it up, and it's really hard to tell, but you did a California neck set. It's called slip in the block, so you have to loosen the block and a little bit around here.
Yeah,
And it works. It's not, you wouldn't do it to a vintage Martin,
Yeah,
but it
but-
works.
Perfect for a guild if it doesn't have back button.
But you know, when we first got this guitar in, we did not realize that it was that it was all one piece. It was only when we
integrated.
It was a
tried.
steel string
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of
with
construction.
a Spanish heel.
Yes. It was a low Prinzi.
Yeah, I've seen that. I'm working on one now.
The other thing is, at the flea market, scoring a $100 guitar you think you can sell for $800, you start steaming the neck and the steam has no effect. It means the guitar neck got loose 30 years ago and they glued it back with epoxy. And believe, I've taken one apart. I have an alcohol, my daughter's a dentist, actually an orthodontist, and she has an alcohol lamp that she gave me from her dental school days. And I would take an artist palette and that thing for hours on end, and I would just go tss, tss, and it must have taken me 10 hours to steam that neck out. I think we made $150 in that guitar. So, hey, I have one other thing, and I don't know, this could be afterwards if somebody wants to linger. I have a question for you guys because I'm always looking for knowledge. I have a very rare guitar here, honestly. These were made in St. Louis. It's called a Washington. And they were made in St. Louis in the early 1900s up until maybe 25 or so. If you scour the net, you'll find this one and one other one. So only two have surfaced. And that doesn't mean it's valuable. I mean, again, if I can sell this for $1,000, I'd be happy. But it's actually pretty nicely made, very light, very thin mahogany, nice Adirondack spruce, and you know, nice. Pardon?
It's ladder braced.
It's ladder brace guitar, yeah. And but here's the thing. I mean, it's a mess. The bridge area has to be cleaned up. But here's the thing that I found. I have a bulging side, And that's usually pretty easy. I made those Frankfurt aluminum jigs where you make these little aluminum jigs, you put screws on, you screw them to a workbench, you put the guitar on, and you just tighten the screws where you want the bulb to go in. I have one of those and I've used it successfully, but what I found out about this guitar after I peeled the binding off is that it's not the back and the side that's necessarily loose, it's the kerfing that's loose. So how do you get in there? Number one, I tried it already in one shot with high glue and it didn't work. Just by using a spatula and getting it in. So how do you get glue into the kerfing, because my hand goes this far, into here, because you have to not only glue the top to the side, but you actually have to glue the kerfing as well and get it all level this way and level that way. So that's the question of the day.
kerfing's loose from the side or
The kerfing came loose from the side, yes. Yes, yeah, you can see it's glued to the top, but it lost it to the side, so it's coming up. So you can actually push it down like that. So anyway, you're welcome to look at this. That's my problem right now. And I've been working on this guitar for like 3 months because it's one of those things where you look and you put it down, and you come back a month later, you look, you put it down.
So far you've made $5,000 on one of the
We go for the big score. We go for the slam dunks. Well, folks, I appreciate your attention, and hopefully it didn't go on longer than you'd hoped.
No, excellent. Our budget allows a shirt for your efforts. I know it's a lot of work putting that talk together. I mean, for the amount of time he was here, you guys spent a lot of time getting this ready. So,
I appreciate
there you
that.
are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If anyone wants to play one of these guitars, they're all for sale. I mean, I didn't string them up. I think the Martin's almost in tuning. I do have a tuner if you want to play them. You're welcome to look at the memorabilia.